August 1933. The Soviet Army officially adopts the T-35. Not just another tank, but a giant on tracks. A five-turreted behemoth wrapped in armor, as if forged from outsized expectations. For a time, its sheer presence was enough to intimidate, at least until real war began. The tank that rolled proudly through parades often struggled to reach the battlefield in actual combat. Crews sometimes found themselves choking inside the steel giant, trapped in a machine that broke down more often than it fired. And when some of these tanks did make it to the front, things happened that rarely appeared in official reports. Why did Soviet soldiers sometimes die not in open battle, but inside the very vehicle meant to protect them? How did the T-35 turn from a symbol of power into a metal cage for its own crew? And how did a machine conceived as the pinnacle of engineering become, in the war's darkest phase, a symbol of failure? In this video, we tell the story of a tank that couldn't keep pace with its era. You'll learn why the T-35 was defeated less by enemy fire than the harsh realities of modern warfare, why many crews came to distrust it, and how, even from this costly lesson, came ideas that later helped the Soviet Union endure. In the late 1920s, the Red Army could already sense that the era of light tanks was nearing its end. The world was growing more tense, and against the backdrop of Europe's rapid industrial growth and the rising military ambitions of neighboring states, the USSR formed an ambitious idea: to build a true armored fist, a heavy tank that would be more than just a vehicle, but a symbol of power. The problem was that the Soviet engineering base was still developing, and the task itself was almost fantastical: to create a machine that did not yet exist, either on paper or in reality. To save time, the leadership chose to draw on foreign experience. A delegation of German engineers arrived in the Soviet Union. At the time, Germany was prohibited from building tanks on its own territory, and cooperation with the USSR gave them an opportunity to continue their work. The group was led by Edward Grott, an engineer whose designs were filled with complex and ambitious ideas. He presented several concepts, the most ambitious of which weighed nearly 100 tons, a vehicle closer in mass to a locomotive than a conventional tank, with armament, armor, and mechanics that seemed ahead of their time. But there was a hidden problem within those blueprints. Every proposed design was extraordinarily complex, extremely expensive, and deeply impractical. The sheer weight alone would have required infrastructure stronger than most tank bridges, closer to reinforced concrete crossings than anything available at the time. Given the realities of the young Soviet economy and a still developing transportation network, the concept quickly fell apart. In the end, none of Grott's heavy tank designs were ever built, and the project was deemed unworkable. Yet the idea itself had taken root. Even though the German path proved to be a dead end, the concept of a Soviet heavy breakthrough tank remained. From that seed began the story of a machine that would later become less a terror of the battlefield and more a mirror reflecting the grand illusions of its era. When Soviet engineers finally decided to move forward on their own, they had gained more than just ambition. By the early 1930s, the young design school had grown confident enough to attempt what once seemed impossible: the creation of a domestically built heavy tank. The project was named the T-35. On paper, it looked like a steel fortress on tracks: 5 turrets, 3 armed with cannons and the others with machine guns. It wasn't meant merely to destroy, it was meant to intimidate. The initial projected weight sounded almost modest, around 38 tons. But with each stage of development, the design kept expanding, accumulating additional armor, mechanisms, turrets, and systems. By the time the first production example rolled out in November 1933, the tank weighed nearly 60 tons. It was almost twice as heavy as originally planned and far more complex to maintain. Still, no one rushed to halt the program because visually it was impressive. Like something pulled from the cover of a science fiction magazine, it embodied scale and raw presence. The central turret carried a 76mm gun, serious firepower for the time, especially against infantry and lightly armored targets. On either side were two turrets with 45mm cannons designed for anti-tank combat. The remaining turrets were dedicated to engaging enemy personnel. Depending on the configuration, the tank mounted up to 7 machine guns. It was a true behemoth, bristling with barrels like quills on a porcupine. In theory, it could fire in nearly every direction at once, like a small army compressed into a single hull. But behind that imposing exterior lay a different reality. Operating the giant was difficult. The crew numbered as many as 11 men, each confined to a narrow position within what was essentially an armored maze. Coordination between turrets was challenging, and visibility was limited. This was a vehicle that demanded not just training, but near orchestral precision from its crew. Even the mechanics were strained. The transmission was frequently overloaded, the suspension suffered under the weight, and turning in place felt less like a maneuver and more like a complicated ritual. Despite all of this, the T-35 was accepted into service, not because it was perfect, but because it existed and because it was enormous. It appeared in parades, shown in photographs, and projected an image of power. In many ways, this tank was built as much for display as for combat, a centerpiece meant to impress. For a long time, few people were willing to look beyond that image. When the parades ended and the drums were replaced by explosions, the giant finally left the parade grounds behind. 1941. The war had begun. Along the western borders of the USSR, everything that could move was rushed into combat readiness, including the T-35. For the first time, it stepped onto the stage it had supposedly been built for. On paper, it looked like a fortress on tracks, and in person, the T-35 did make a powerful impression. Tall, layered with turrets, bristling with gun barrels, it could intimidate simply by its silhouette. But reality was far colder. This was no controlled exercise or theatrical display of strength. This was the opening udar of blitzkrieg, fast, coordinated, relentless, and the T-35 was completely unprepared for that kind of war. Its first and ultimately only campaign began in the summer of 1941 as part of Soviet mechanized corps formations. Most T-35s were deployed in the Kiev Special Military District. There, across the wide plains of Ukraine, they faced highly mobile, well-coordinated, and well-supplied Wehrmacht units. These were not disorganized recruits. They were mechanized formations, drilled to operate with precision, treating warfare as a practiced craft. Despite its massive presence, the T-35 rarely had the chance to show what it was supposed to do. It struggled to reach the battlefield in time, could not maneuver quickly, and even moving these vehicles from place to place required significant logistical effort. The multiple turrets that looked so formidable in parades became a coordination problem in combat. Where the situation demanded immediate reaction and fluid maneuver, a machine with 5 separate firing positions often ended up working against itself. And yet, despite these limitations, some T-35s did see combat. There are documented cases where they managed to inflict damage, hold a position longer than lighter vehicles, or briefly serve as a focal point of resistance at a critical moment.
But such episodes were the exception. More often, the tanks never reached a sustained engagement because they were overtaken by a different kind of threat. Not enemy guns, not bombs, their own mechanical failures. A tank created as a symbol finally met the reality of modern war, and that encounter proved to be its last.
While the T-35 struggled along Ukraine's dirt roads, German columns were already advancing with the precision of a stopwatch. They weren't simply moving forward, they were operating a carefully tuned blitzkrieg machine, where every vehicle had a defined role and logistics functioned as a weapon in its own right. Against that tempo, the T-35 looked like something from another era, heavy, slow, bulky, and difficult to maneuver. Soviet mechanized corps faced a paradox of numbers. On paper, they appeared formidable, with hundreds of tanks, including heavy vehicles. In practice, however, these formations were overloaded with equipment they couldn't properly maintain or supply. Each unit resembled a body wrapped in armor but lacking circulation. There were chronic shortages of fuel, spare parts, recovery vehicles, and reliable communications personnel. The T-35 felt this imbalance more than most. Getting it into battle required more than crew courage. It required an entire support infrastructure, and that infrastructure was already cracking under the pressure of reality. German forces struck quickly, targeted weak points, bypassed strongholds, captured supply depots, and severed logistics routes. Meanwhile, the T-35 often remained stuck within columns that could be easily isolated. On the battlefield, this translated into a simple outcome. The tank frequently arrived too late or in the wrong place to make a meaningful impact. Maneuver? Almost impossible. Redeployment? A major undertaking. Coordination with other units? Hampered by limited mobility and unreliable communications. It was a clash between two philosophies of war. The Germans emphasized speed, flexibility, and operational tempo. The Soviet army, still shaped by earlier doctrine, relied on mass and visible firepower. But the era had changed. Victory no longer went to the side with the most tons of steel. It favored the side that could move faster, react sooner, and sustain momentum. Within that rhythm, there was simply no place for the T-35. It had become a foreign body inside a force struggling to adapt to new rules of survival. It quickly became clear that the greatest danger to the T-35 wasn't ahead of it, it was inside the machine itself. The giant that had seemed unshakable on parade began to fall apart during real marches, sometimes before it even reached the front. Its complex design, overloaded with components and mechanisms, tolerated neither haste, poor roads, nor a lack of proper maintenance. The engine operated at its limits, the transmission struggled under the enormous weight, and the suspension wore down at an accelerated rate. Any serious mechanical failure could become a death sentence for the vehicle. Evacuating something that heavy was nearly impossible, and repairs required time, tools, and trained specialists, resources that were simply unavailable during the chaotic withdrawals of 1941. Maintenance units often lagged behind or were cut off entirely, leaving the tanks isolated, massive, immobile, and helpless. Fuel created another major problem. The T-35 consumed it in huge quantities, and in the confusion of 1941, supply columns could not keep up with the slow-moving vehicles. Tanks stopped not because they had been hit, but because they could no longer move. Where faster machines sometimes had a chance to break contact, the giant was often doomed to remain where it stalled. As a result, most T-35s never reached sustained combat. One after another, they dropped out along the route, forcing their crews into difficult decisions.
Vehicles once conceived as the peak of engineering ambition became static landmarks on the margins of a moving war. And here, the central tragedy of the T-35 became undeniable. It was too complex for an under-resourced battlefield, too heavy for a fast-moving war, and too demanding for the chaos that engulfed the country in the summer of 1941.
Even when the engine fell silent and the track stopped for good, the T-35 sometimes kept fighting with its body. Stripped of mobility, communications, and supply, it could become an armored strongpoint, an improvised firing position the crew defended to the last. Its primary strengths, movement, and striking power were gone, but its thick armor and array of guns could still inflict damage. These machines, frozen on the battlefield, did not go quiet without a fight. Their crews did not always abandon them at once. In some cases, they turned the disabled tank into a stationary gun platform, firing until their ammunition was exhausted, blocking roads, drawing enemy attention, and covering the withdrawal of nearby units. It was no longer a battle for victory, so much as a delaying action, making sure the enemy could not advance without paying a cost. There are accounts of individual T-35s absorbing direct hits and continuing to resist for as long as they could. At range, they were not always easy to destroy, especially where heavy artillery was limited. When the enemy closed in, the fighting could become brutally close, guns firing from multiple angles, each turret operating independently, each position holding on through its final moments. The T-35 did not become a winning weapon of the war, but it did become a captive of it. And in many ways, its crews were captives of the machine as well. Evacuation was often difficult. Because of its size and layout, abandoning the tank quickly, especially under fire, could be nearly impossible. Some crews died inside, not through a single mistake, but because they were trapped inside a concept too cumbersome to survive modern combat. And yet, even stripped of its intended role, the T-35 could still serve a purpose. Inefficient as a weapon, it could still function as a symbol of resistance, holding ground in ways its designers never planned. Armor, guns, and hull became less a piece of equipment and more a physical barrier that slowed the enemy, if only for a short time, the time a nation needed to regroup. As the dust of the summer of 1941 began to settle, one thing became clear. The T-35 did not survive the new kind of war it had entered. It wasn't formally eliminated as a class, it simply vanished, swallowed by the chaos of the opening months. Of the 59 vehicles built, nearly all were lost within the first weeks, not in famous set-piece battles, but on the march, while trying just to reach the front. Many were never officially written off. Events were moving too quickly, even for paperwork. With that disappearance came a hard realization. The T-35 was not so much a mistake as an illusion, the belief that war could be won through sheer mass and scale alone, that the sight of a tank could matter more than its actual performance, that armor could substitute for tactics, and a forest of turrets could replace the ability to maneuver. It became a symbol of an era that valued spectacle over speed, steel used as much to impress as to fight, a machine built for parades as much as for battle. And that is precisely why the story of the T-35 matters. In it, you can see an entire mindset, an age that equated size with strength. And yet there is something more within that defeat. The crews of the T-35 did not surrender without a fight. Many held their positions to the end, not because they had chosen to lose, but because leaving the vehicle under fire was often impossible.
Their persistence, their attempts to keep fighting even from disabled, immobile tanks, became part of the broader resistance that began in the summer of 1941 and carried through to victory in 1945. The T-35 did not become a hero of the war, but it did become one of its participants, silent, heavy, and stubborn, a machine that could not keep up with modern warfare, yet remains a reminder that victory is decided not by what rolls through parades, but by the endurance of the people inside.